Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for unanimous consent that all members be given 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. This week marks a very solemn anniversary, the anniversary of Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine. 3 years ago, Russia started this war by invading Ukraine, not the other way around. I repeat, 3 years ago, Russia started this war, and I'm utterly disgusted that President Trump would refute this absolute truth. I'm equally horrified by President Trump's characterization of President Zelensky as a dictator who does not want peace. I was with President Zelensky just last week in Germany for the Munich Security Conference. He is an honorable and earnest leader, a man who has even offered to step down from the presidency if it would guarantee the freedom of his people. President Trump's blatant lie, an absurd insult, is a lie directly out of Soviet-style propagandists' playbooks. It is Putin who wants to take Russia's resource-rich land. It is Putin who wants to strip its people of their rights and their freedoms. And it is Putin who wants to destroy another European democracy. It is Putin who is a cancer on the world, a liar, a torturer, a murderer, and a war criminal. It is appalling to see our president of these United States, expected to be a reliable standard bearer of democracy, align himself and as a result ourselves so closely with our adversaries, even organizing a sit-down to determine the fate of Ukraine without Ukraine at the table and without the input of our European allies at all. Whatever comes out of these meetings will not be a peace agreement. It will instead be a Russian power grab and an appeasement of war criminal Putin, facilitated by these United States, an illegitimate peace. And it's all horrifying, it's all infuriating, and it's all antithetical to our American ideals. As President Trump and his administration publicly trash our allies, undermine the strength of NATO, and decimate our international aid programs, our adversaries are greedily and happily waiting to fill the gaps that this administration is deliberately creating. On Monday, the United States joined Russia, North Korea, Belarus, Sudan, and Hungary, and I will name them again. Russia, North Korea, Belarus, Sudan, and Hungary, a group of countries I never would like us to be associated with, in voting against the United Nations resolution condemning Russian aggression and demanding the immediate withdrawal of Putin's forces from Ukraine. To quote my Republican colleague and dear friend, Congressman Don Bacon, and I quote, "The Trump administration royally screwed up on Ukraine." Another anniversary is fast approaching, indeed. On April 20th of last year, 101 Republicans voted to support Ukraine. And I'm really glad that Representative Bacon is speaking out about President Trump's actions. But I wonder, where are the rest of his colleagues? I hope that the other 100 members who supported aid to Ukraine in April will be as brave as Representative Bacon and speak out against this administration's ridiculous and dangerous actions. I want to emphasize how important it is that the American people hear President Trump's own words, see his own actions, and be appropriately outraged. President Trump's disavowal of Ukraine and his cozying up to dictators puts us here in the United States all at risk as well. President Trump's turn towards authoritarianism leaves us exposed politically and economically. Scorned allies could pull out or change their free trade agreements, cause shortages in imported goods, including food and oil, pharmaceuticals, and more. President Trump campaigned on bringing down costs, but his very actions right now are indeed undermining the value of the dollar and driving up inflation. We've heard over and over again from the American people that the prices of essential goods are already too high, and President Trump's actions will only hurt our attempts to bring down these costs. America's global leadership also helps to keep Americans safe, too. President Trump turning his back on Ukraine isolates us and undermines our strength the strength of international institutions and the security networks that work like NATO. This encourages NATO allies to question our own alliance and allegiance. It in turn causes our allies worldwide to do the same. And those who are considering with whom to form alliances, and there are many, it causes them as well to turn away from us. It gets worse, with President Trump actually allying himself with China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. These countries now seemingly have America's explicit backing to spread their influence, and in some cases to spread their force, like we've seen in Ukraine. This will undoubtedly cause people to free oppressive regimes and create new regimes who will be inspired by this global democratic backslide. President Trump claimed he was going to reduce this kind of migration, but the political turmoil he is causing will in fact make it worse, pushing people to seek safety outside of their own home country. We can't turn our back on Ukraine and the world, and we cannot expect that the consequences of that decision will not reach our shores. And the American way of life is reliant on our global reputation and interconnectivity, and President Trump is doing his very best to tear that all down. President Trump must reverse his dangerous position. He must stop this gamesmanship, and he must recommit to our long-standing alliances instead of realigning ourselves, the United States, with dictators. I want to turn now to my esteemed colleague from the great state of Ohio, the very Honorable Marcy Kaptur, for 4 minutes.
I thank Congresswoman so very much for allowing me to speak this evening, and to also thank her for her service to the United States of America in our military. She knows the cost of liberty. And there couldn't be a better member of Congress than Chrissy Houlahan, I'll tell you that. A lot of Americans, perhaps, in the newer generations, don't understand what Russia is capable of. So I refer you to 2 books, if you're interested, and I hope you are. One is Bloodlands by Dr. Timothy Snyder, now at Yale University, who discusses the history of the region that we're talking about and what happened yesterday at the United Nations, and also another book called Red Sparrow. I would recommend you don't read that in the evening, but during the day, because you will learn more about how Russia both operates now and has always operated. To give a little history, before the collapse of the murderous dictatorship that was called the Soviet Union, that occurred in 1991, and had extended all the way from Russia, all the way across Europe to Germany to East Berlin, which has been free since 1991, a great president, Ronald Reagan, served this nation. He was elected twice. He correctly identified Russia as the evil empire. Ronald Reagan had been an actor in Hollywood and fought to remove communists from the ranks of the Actors Guild in California, where he met his wife. And that particular effort by Reagan took great courage, because he could have been killed. That's what it's like to deal with Russia as the Soviet Union, or the empire now. Another Republican president during my service was George W. Bush. He named Russia and North Korea as the axis of evil. We could add Iran and other countries, but never before at the United Nations has any U.S. president ever stood with the dictators of Russia. Those countries that voted with Russia yesterday are state sponsors of terrorism. Russia understands terror. That's what she does. So for the United States to stand beside Russia, North Korea, Belarus at the United States, at the United Nations, it's appalling. It is appalling. Russia's atrocities go back hundreds of years. During World War II, on the soils of Ukraine, 14 million people were murdered. This is the tradition of Putin. If you do not know that, you are naive. Wake up. Wake up. Even China abstained from the vote yesterday. Aligning with these countries who past presidents have called the epitome of evil on earth is shocking. The very fundamental purpose of this nation is liberty. That's why we're here. This isn't some game, and it's not about strategic metals or very precious items that are underground somewhere. It is about something much more precious, liberty. So to see that happen at the UN yesterday, I thought, what have they been drinking up there? Ukraine is a scrimmage line for liberty on the continent of Europe today, and no president of the United States should cavort with dictators. We have always been the bastion of freedom. Our people have died for it, defending these ideals around the world. And yesterday, President Trump cowered and appeased one of the most dangerous dictatorships in the world. It is shameful, it is un-American, it is not patriotic, and it's almost traitorous. Maybe it is traitorous to do that. We know Russia, we know North Korea, we know Iran. They don't stand for liberty. They're part of the new spider web of tyranny that's poised against us, if anyone is paying attention, anywhere in this country. The actions to vote with them and against Ukraine is a blotch on America's record as a champion for a free world. Most of the world is not free. If you haven't traveled to these places, try. You might learn something. So tomorrow is another day, and I urge those who lead foreign policy for this administration to remember who we fight for, who our friends are, who our allies are, and who are our enemies united against us. I also just wanted to place on the record a reminder that when Ukraine was beginning to be free after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, a great man, Viktor Yushchenko, was president of the young Ukraine. What did Putin do? Putin had him poisoned. And Yushchenko survived somehow. When they flew him to Europe and they tried to pump him out with some kind of horrible, horrible strategic metal that he had been made to swallow when he ate with the dictators who continue to control Russia. He has just killed, Putin has just killed Alexei Navalny in a terrible Arctic prison because he wanted to run against Putin. And that's how you get elected in Russia. You kill the opposition. So my friends, pay attention, inform yourselves, and if you want to understand how a tyranny operates, look at the film on YouTube. It takes 30 minutes. It's called Freedom Means Never Surrender. It's a documentary about how a tyranny functions. It just won the Telly Award. Take the time to do it. Recall for yourselves the preciousness of the liberty we enjoy. And I yield back my time to the gentlelady, and I thank you very much, Congresswoman, for allowing us to speak on this special order tonight.
You're very, very welcome. It's my privilege. Mr. Speaker, may I ask how much time we have remaining?
The gentlewoman is recognized until 10 p.m.
May I ask how much?
Until 10 p.m. You have 28 minutes left.
Terrific, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'd now like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Vindman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 years ago this week, Russia launched an unprovoked invasion on Ukraine. We are entering the 4th year of war in Ukraine and 11 years of war on Ukraine since the invasion in Crimea and the Donbass. In the past few days, this invasion, this major invasion, that fact has sadly been disputed. But it's important that history represent the truth. Whether it's Putin or anyone else, including in our government, that says Russia is not the aggressor and that Ukraine is responsible for the invasion, they're lying. Yesterday's anniversary reminds us that the Ukrainian people continue to suffer, but I know that they will remain strong and resilient. This is not a regional fight. Ukraine's sovereignty is a U.S. national security issue. We must hold the line in Ukraine now, or we may have American boots on the ground fighting in Europe in a few years. That's my fear. We do want peace, and yet this administration has begun negotiations from the weakest possible position. Before we even get to the table, Ukraine has been excluded from NATO. Territorial concessions were granted to Russia, and Ukraine didn't even have a seat at the table. This is what they get for a sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of their people, cities destroyed across Ukraine. The Trump administration must increase pressure on Russia if we are truly interested in peace. With Russia in particular, weakness invites aggression, and easing up on Russia only makes Ukraine's fight harder. We must stand firm. I spent 25 years in the Army defending America's national security interests at home and abroad. When I retired a little over 2 years ago, I traveled to Ukraine 14 times investigating war crimes. I traveled to Kharkiv, 20 miles from the Russian border. I traveled to Zaporizhia, 20 miles from the Russian front. I traveled to Mykolaiv, Chernihiv, cities that have appeared in the news, devastated by Russian attacks. Those people are resilient. They're fighting for their freedom, much like we fought for our freedom almost 250 years ago. We're going to be celebrating that anniversary in one short year. Can you imagine what it would have been like if France did not intervene on our behalf? You know, we have a portrait there of the Marquis de Lafayette that stood with us shoulder to shoulder. The French spilled blood on our battlefields. We weren't even asked to do that. We were asked to provide some material support, 31 tanks, a couple of hundred of our armor vehicles, and some money. Now, granted, we have to watch how we spend our money. We have an obligation to the American people. But we also have to recognize where our national security interests lie. And the fact that we spent 80 years defending an international order that our grandfathers fought for and died on European battlefields for. I think we've forgotten that for some reason. I can't explain it. But they know that in Ukraine, because that's what they're fighting for. They know that if they give up, the Russians will occupy. And in those occupied areas, they've already deported tens of thousands of children to be re-educated, taken away from their family. They've put the Ukrainian people in camps. Russia is basically like a boa constrictor, slowly digesting chunks of Ukraine. If we pause now without security guarantees, they'll be back at it in a few years, just like they were after Crimea, like they were in Georgia, like they were in Moldova. We have to be clear-eyed about that in our interests. And so in Virginia's 7th District, my voters expect me to stand up for American values, and that's exactly what I'm doing by speaking out today. And that's why I'll keep fighting for strong U.S. leadership all around the world. That includes Ukraine's sovereignty, for our own country's national security interests, and for the values that keep and have kept America strong. On this anniversary, we must reaffirm our commitment that we stand against autocrats and dictators like Russia and North Korea, and that we stand with Ukraine on the right side of history. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'd now like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join my colleagues in condemning what can only be seen as sheer desertion, yes, I use the word desertion, of Ukraine by this president, and I deeply regret, at least to date, by my Republican colleagues in Congress. The dictator of Russia, as has already been pointed out, has not seen a better day, at least since the successful death of Alexei Navalny. But let's be clear, Putin is not the only dictator, and for the third time I use the word dictator, who's dancing today. Let's just take one example, the dictators of Iran. For them, this betrayal is a bright light in a dim room. They want nothing more than a stronger and resurgent and unchecked Russia, because that brings them renewed hope to their singular focus of the destruction of Israel. And by the way, I say very directly to our friends of Israel, wherever you are, and many of you were in the capital today, that if you do not call out this abandonment of Ukraine now, you have learned nothing from 1939 Czechoslovakia. But there's one dictator in our world who is cheering the loudest of all, and that dictator is the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. This is the world he covets. This is the world that he's worked for. This is the world that turns the lock and opens the door on his ambitions. The world of a weakened, isolated America that nobody trusts. A world in which this country walks away from proven international rules-based orders that have kept the peace and stability for 3 generations now. A world, he hopes for, that has forgotten that true peace and prosperity are built on both strength and democratic values, both of those. Yes, the desertion of Ukraine and its sure ripple effects show that he finally has the willing partner he has sought, even more than Putin himself. A partner equally committed to an ad hoc transactional foreign policy where all that really matters is power, money, and leverage. That alliances, principles, and loyalty are disposable, as if that ever alone would buy lasting peace, and there is no example in world history that it does. But our president says, don't worry, we have an ocean between us and Ukraine, so what's to worry about? And no doubt in time, he will assert the same thing about my ocean, the Pacific Ocean, between us and the People's Republic of China. He will say that that ocean offers the same illusion of installation from the world of reality. Well, tell that to Japan or Taiwan or South Korea or the Philippines. Tell them that that ocean protects them. Or the ASEAN countries, or Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, India, the island nations of the Pacific. Tell that to the citizens of the American homeland in the Pacific, Hawaii, Guam, the Northern Marianas, American Samoa. Yes, just try to tell the rest of our world and country that the outcome in Ukraine has nothing to do with the geopolitical challenge of our time, the threat of the Chinese Communist Party. Tell that to anybody, and you truly live in denial of the world today and the lessons of history. The PRC, though, they know history, and they already have an edition of the People's Daily, their leading newspaper, already printed up as a gift for the president's trip home when he surely visits shortly. And the headline of the People's Daily reads in Mandarin, "Peace in our time." Those are the unavoidable broader stakes of betraying Ukraine today. And I know my Republican colleagues know this. I know this because I've heard them say it repeatedly over 3 years. I've heard them say it in committee. I've heard them say it on this floor. I've heard them say it in public. But where are you now? Did something in the world change in the last week or two? Was there some fundamental shift in our understanding of this world, in our alliances, in our commitment to loyalties and principles and values, in addition to strength? I don't think so, and I don't think anybody else think anything has changed other than a president that wants to go in a different direction. And that president has no effective check and balance on this tragic mistake, except for the majority in the House and the Senate. And so I really hope to my Republican colleagues in this body, because I don't hold out hope for the administration and the presidency, but I do hold out hope from my colleagues. I hope you find your way back soon through the fog into reality again before it's too late. I yield back.
Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, I'd now like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking my friend and colleague, Representative Houlahan, for convening this special order. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to support our ally, Ukraine, and speak up against the grave threat the Trump administration's support for Russia poses to democracy at home and abroad. Yesterday marked 3 years since Russia's unprovoked and brutal invasion of Ukraine, a sovereign nation. We have since witnessed incredible bravery from the Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines to the families who have endured unimaginable loss yet continue to fight for their homeland. My community of Buffalo knows what it means to stand together in times of hardship. We are a city that welcomes, embraces, and lifts up those in need. I stood arm in arm with Western New York's Ukrainian community in Niagara Square, designated Ukraine Freedom Square, just outside Buffalo City Hall, days after Russia's invasion. What I said then is just as true today. The United States of America must always stand with Ukraine against Russian aggression. Buffalo is known as the city of good neighbors, and that spirit has been evident in the way our community has opened its doors to Ukrainian refugees, providing shelter, education, and hope for a better future. Members of this body, both Democrats and Republicans alike, understand that this is not just Ukraine's fight. This is a battle between democracy and tyranny, between freedom and oppression. That is why this body has come together on numerous occasions to pass legislation to help the people of Ukraine resist the Russian invasion and defend their homeland. And we continue to do this because we know that if Russia succeeds, it sets a dangerous precedent for dictators around the world, and it threatens the security of our NATO allies. So when the President of the United States chooses to spread the same false Russian propaganda as Vladimir Putin, absolving Russia of its responsibility for starting the war, and defaming the democratically elected president of our ally, we should have the courage to stand up and call it what it is, a bald-faced lie. And it's shameful when we, the shining city upon a hill, as President Reagan put it, oppose a United Nations resolution condemning Russia and supporting Ukraine. The rest of the world should look to us as a model of democracy, but instead, we're enabling a dictator. And just think about the company that we're keeping with this UN vote. The only other countries to oppose this resolution were Russia, North Korea, and Belarus, all dictatorships. Since when does the United States side with dictators? I suppose when we have a president who says he wants to be one. Turning our back on Ukraine goes against everything Americans have fought and died for since we declared our independence from a monarch in England. Supporting Russian aggression against Ukraine sends a dangerous message to our allies around the world. The United States is no longer a reliable friend. You are on your own. Well, I have news for you. We are much better than this as a country. This isn't just about democracy, it's also about our national security and our credibility on a world stage. The world is a safer place, and the American people are more secure when we stand united with our allies, uphold our commitments to global peace and stability, and lead with strength, diplomacy, and integrity. I yield back.
Thank you very much. And I very much want to thank all of my colleagues for joining us here tonight and me here tonight. This evening, we heard about the damage that President Trump's actions have done to our nation's security. If our nation turns its back on Ukraine, we heard about what comes next. Our ally Taiwan left in greater jeopardy to a Chinese invasion. Our allies left elsewhere looking for security and for other trading opportunities. And worst of all, our enemies worldwide left emboldened by Trump's isolationist actions. The American people should be worried tonight. History has shown us that when America is isolated, we are less safe. And I very much hope that my Republican friends, the 101 of them, now 100 of them, who very recently voted in support of this nation in its fight for their democracy and, as a consequence, all of our democratic values, will stand up to this, our president, and will help us, the United States, change our course, and as a consequence, the world change its course for safety and freedom as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.